Good morning, everyone, and welcome to 3Fox Presents SCAPE, A Better Way. This is the second of our series of 4 webinars, and today's session is titled Unlocking Better Value and Preparing for the Construction Playbook. My name is Toby Fox. I'm the Managing Director at 3Fox, the marketing agency for councils. And as our regular viewers will know by now, our job is to keep our network of councils and developers and investors and their influencers and advisors connected. And one way we're doing that is through this channel, 3Fox Presents. It's a platform for our network across the development community to discuss challenges and issues. And one of those challenges is presented by the Construction Playbook, which comes into force in January next year. Research by SCAPE partners indicates that only 51% of local authorities are aware of the Construction Playbook, and even those were generally aware only at a low level. So this series of webinars aims to raise that awareness and to demonstrate how the playbook might help deliver better outcomes from construction and development and provide some practical help on how its guidance can be implemented. To do that, we've got a fabulous panel carefully assembled to provide you with a wide spectrum of insights. And it's a pleasure to welcome today Councillor Darren Rodwell, the leader at Barking and Dagenham Council, Martin Faulkner, the commercial manager at Urban Growth Company, Tara Lee McVeigh, Infrastructure Director at Perfect Circle, and Andrew Bannister, Assistant Director of Development at SCAPE. We're going to spend the next hour in 3 discussions. Firstly, around the role value plays in the new guidance and how we define that value. And then we're going to look at how procurement regimes are going to have to adapt and evolve to accommodate the new guidance. And finally, we'll look at how compliance is going to be ensured, the rewards for doing so and the penalties for non-compliance. We'd like you to join in this conversation, viewers, so make use of the Q&A function to fire in questions and fuel the discussion, bearing in mind that the more concise your question, the more likely we are to pick it up. And if you'd like to share more extensive thoughts with our panel and viewers, please do make use of the chat function. We've got a few surveys and polls for you as well, so you can contribute by responding to those when they pop up on your screens. But before we do any of that, let's introduce the Construction Playbook. What is it? It's a government guidance document about sourcing and contracting public works projects launched by the Cabinet Office in December 2020. It was developed with the Construction Leadership Council, and it sets out the government's expectations of how contracting authorities and suppliers, including the supply chain, should engage with each other. It does that through 14 key policies for assessing, procuring and delivering public works projects and programmes. Well, that's the bare bones of it. Panel, what does the Construction Playbook mean to you? Andrew?
Well, thanks, Toby. What it means is that for the first time, we've got something tangible, which we really welcome. Previously, we've had reports going back over 20, 25 years. We've had pieces of guidance, we've had policy notes, but we've now got something which is tangible, an expectation of how things will be done. That's the first thing. And the second thing is it's good policy and good guidance, because it sets out that value, which we will be talking about, I know, later on, is no longer going to be just about a race to the lowest price. It's going to look at value in the round, procurement in the round, and delivery against expectation of quality. So that if you want to spend the public money, you've actually got to go along with this and do it properly rather than simply racing to the bottom. So we welcome it wholeheartedly.
Thanks, Andrew. Tara?
So in my experience, it's that key principle of project startup investment that the Construction Playbook focuses on. And I think that can really influence project success. As someone who has been involved in hundreds of projects, I understand that front end spend can sometimes be worrying, but the investment and the promotion of technical knowledge and education across the project teams, the clients, the stakeholders can really grow from strength to strength.
Great stuff, Tara. Thanks a lot. Darren, what's your take on the Construction Playbook?
I think it's nice to see that government is finally catching up with nationally, that is, with local government, because most of us have been doing a lot of what's already in there. Again, their ability to articulate it, as you've already mentioned, has been very limited. Most of us were quite embroiled in dealing with COVID in December 2020 when it came out. So we really didn't have much time to want to discuss this. In my hat, you say I'm the leader of Barking and Dagenham. I'm also housing planning and deputy chair for London councils, as well as the EEHC board, which is Environment, Economy, Housing and Transport for the Local Government Association. This hasn't come to me in any of those forums. So it just shows you that, again, it hasn't quite got its ducks in a row when it comes to talking to local government. We already know about this. We know about the long-term planning. We've been doing it. We know about needing to speed up delivery. Actually, in Barking and Dagenham, we've been doing it. 4,000 homes we'll have over the next, over the next 3 years. Involving supply chains, again, we make sure that there are standards we expect. Our problem will be is government still wants the best value. It's still there. It doesn't matter what they try and intimate. It's how we will, as local government, try and balance all of the asks.
Great stuff. We'll come to that, back to that point on value in just a second, Darren. Thanks for that. Martin, we've got it's something tangible. It's a tangible kind of format for what's already been talked about for years, and good guidance from Andrew. It's an opportunity to better educate teams working on projects from Tara, and it's what the public sector's already been doing from Darren. What's your take on the construction playbook, Martin?
I think for me, what it does is encourages collaboration between the private and the public sector. And it's about getting things right from the start, setting out what is actually we're looking to achieve from projects, and getting early contractor involvement and developing that into a successful project for both parties. And it's about avoiding disputes. It's brought in the conflict avoidance pledge, which is something we welcome. And it's about managing risks by the people most appropriate and able to manage those risks. And it's, I suppose, about both parties working together with a mutual set of aims and objectives. And it's we really welcome it.
Great stuff. Okay, thanks everyone. Let's move into our first discussion then. And while we do that, I'm going to launch the first of our polls as well and ask our audience how compliant they feel, how aligned they feel with the construction playbook, bearing in mind this sense that it really hasn't permeated local authorities yet, our main network, as Darren mentioned. And well done for SCAPE for bringing this forward and making that happen. Darren, let's talk a little bit about value. You mentioned it earlier. I mean, how do we define value? It plays a really important part in what the construction playbook is trying to achieve. So how are you defining value? What does value mean to you when you're procuring for development and construction?
So for me personally, I believe that, we've got two parties coming into a project from different ends of the spectrum. And I always find it difficult when parties come to us and say, oh, we want what you want. No, you don't. You need to make a profit for your shareholders. I want to build a community. So what this does, as I said before, is it's following what some local authorities were already doing. So I look at what we're doing in Barking and Dagenham. We already have frameworks that allow us to have long-term partnerships. We already have those frameworks that involve the wider improvements to an area rather than just the build. I often say it's not just about bricks and mortar, it's about hearts and minds. How do we bring them together? Because I could be dealing with up to 15 to 20 different developers at any one time in a borough. Now, if they're all building in isolation, what they're not doing is building in cooperation. And that is something we have to balance all of the time. So defining value is defining what you want to see in your community. And it isn't just the value of property, it's actually the value of the person. And that's what we're trying to do, maximize as much as we can, making sure that we build a mixed community, no gated communities that bring additional value to the community that's already in situ, because we forget sometimes that those people, it's their lives that are being disrupted. And that to me is what value, additional value should be coming out of anything that we do, acknowledging our positions and seeing where we can come together.
And is that explicit in your procurement processes and in your tenders and so on? Do you make that really explicit, or is that more implicit, that those are the sort of filters that you run everything through, but it's not necessarily printed, as it were?
Well, no, we do have some stuff in there. So obviously you'd have what the seal was and the 106. And remember, we're going to be, the planning white paper soon will take a lot of these powers away with the zoning. So actually it makes it harder for local authorities to even agree with this, because we won't have the powers to stop people who want to build, let's just say, tomorrow's slums. And that's quite concerning for me as someone who leads a council that's already had to knock down lots of older estates, you know, that are 50 years or less old. And you know, it's quite interesting that government says we've got to do all this, but it seems like it's an elastic band. They want us to do more with less, and there's only so much we can stretch.
Thanks, Darren. Martin, does that resonate with you? What's your take on value?
Yeah, I think for my take on value is it's much more about the procurement stage, getting the most economically advantageous tender and our tenders back meet. And it's about, you know, the technical probably far more than the commercial side of things. Our tenders typically are between 70 and 60% technical, 30% commercial. And what we're really looking for from out of that are the suppliers and the bidders really being able, through the technical assessment, being able to address the challenges that we face with some of our procurements. It's about, you know, innovation and collaboration and how they're going to address those issues. The other bit that we have in there, we have 10% of our tenders on our large projects are relating to social value. I'm looking for a social value plan from them and contractors committing to that. And so, yeah, it's very much about, you know, getting the right contractor that can deliver on the challenges that we face in particular projects, whether it be taking what I would call an architect's dream and delivering something that is affordable and buildable. And it's getting out of that innovation and working with us and the various stakeholders that we interface with to address all of those challenges, I'd say.
Thanks, Martin. It's probably worth sort of setting the context a bit, isn't it? Darren's mentioned that Barking Dagenham's building 4,000 homes, I think you said, and film studios and various other schemes there. The nature of the urban growth company is slightly different, isn't it, Martin? You're building stations and
well,
airport buildings.
We have two main projects at the moment. One is the redevelopment of Birmingham International Station and turning it into a multimodal transport hub where 10 different modes of transport meet, with people there aiming them to linger and creating a sense of space. And I say for that, at the moment, we have a concept design that is, as I call it, an architect's dream. And what we're looking to do is have someone to be able to help work with us and Network Rail and all the other stakeholders around that area into something that is still iconic and the gateway to the Midlands and the country, really, because it's linked into HS2 and the interchange station there. And the other project we have is to change the current proposal, which is surface car parking at the HS2 interchange, into a multi-storey car park solution. And that has all sorts of things associated with it because it's on green belts. So there's planning permission to be sorted there, and compliance with HS2 requirements becomes their asset.
And also, you've got to future-proof that against all the changes that are coming our way in terms of car transport, road transport. Yeah,
absolutely. You know, this car park probably won't be built and operational until HS2 becomes operational, which will be some time on. So yes, it's things like automatic. What's the future of electric charging points? How many disabled spaces and do we include in it? And digitalization. And also, you know, changing current materials. You know, it's steel versus concrete. We want to keep it as open as possible because in 7-8 years' time, we'll be in a different place to where we are now.
Absolutely, but you'd say that the definitions of value and the sort of elements to consider that Darren brought up earlier and that you just made, they're very similar.
Yes.
It doesn't matter that you're building different things.
No, it's the same principle.
Yeah. Okay. Great stuff, Tara. Where does value sit for you? What would you like to add to those observations?
Yes, so I thought what Martin said was really refreshing about how they run their procurement, because I agree that when tender opportunities for large infrastructure projects come out, all that information is there. But I think the biggest singlest way that you can get the message across that it's around quality and social value is in that split between the commercials and the technical. And I'd be keen to see the industry go a step further, you know, not just the 60-40, but 80-20, where the clients really want to see the investment in those extra things. It's not just about the price. And when you see that bigger differential, I think that's where the opportunity for contractors and consultants to really showcase what they can do in these iconic projects.
Great stuff, Tara. Thanks a lot. And Andrew, does all of that resonate with you? Is there anything you'd like to add to that kind of consideration of value?
Well, there's so much to echo in there with the way SCAPE operate in terms of our frameworks, because we've been specialising in social value since the inception of our frameworks. We've been ramping that up for 15 years. But I think I sometimes struggle to define value because I tend to think of it as a thing. And actually, I don't think value entirely is a thing. I think it's better thought of as a story. And that goes back to what Graham was saying about, the life of a 50-year-old housing development which is having to be knocked down. If you take something like a school, then the story of the school has only just begun at the point when it's been constructed. That's the end of the preface. And chapter 1 is when the staff come in and start understanding their new environment, when the learners come in, and then as the school matures and becomes the heart of the community, and as it becomes used at night to teach people how to do painting and write novels, and at the weekend for sporting events. That's the story of the school. And then if you've got it right at the end of the life of the school, after it's adapted to its environment and nurtured the learners, then hopefully you can dismantle it fairly easily and recycle or reuse the elements rather than having to just crush it into a heap of concrete. So I think if you look at it in terms of a story, then it works better. And it's something we're doing with our new generation of construction contracts, offers a whole life contract, which is the first time we've ever done that in the construction phase. So instead of just looking at something as a pile of bricks that you've procured and the job's done, it's a whole life story project. And we've got a lot that we're going to be able to say about that when those frameworks launch in a couple of months.
Fantastic. And is there anything you can add to Darren's observation around the planning white paper and changes that, well, I mean, we don't really know which changes are going to come forward from that. It's still in consultation, isn't it? But how that kind of interferes with the aims and objectives of the construction playbook.
I like Darren's remark about the rubber band, actually, because what you get is that one piece of central government policy looks as though it's extremely encouraging, and then somewhere else you have an issue. I think that the planning white paper, we don't know yet, but it's going to present the challenges that Darren's better informed about than I am. I've no doubt about that. But we see that kind of challenge elsewhere, where you have aspirational policy and then you have some other piece of governance which pulls it back. So, in the defence sector at the moment, construction, we work in that sector. The aspirational policy is there to revolutionise the built estate, but there's a particular single source regulations thing going on in the background of that, which means that effectively you're locked out from using two-stage tendering and collaborative engagement at all. It's unintentional, it's one of those things that one bit of government does one thing and one bit of government does the other thing. But these things need to be unpicked, and the better government communicates across departments about it, the better we'll be. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, so Darren, back to you on that, and also this idea of future proofing that Martin picked up on. I mean, when you're building partnerships with developers and contractors and so on, I mean, it must be really hard to look that far forward to see what our lifestyles are going to be like in 10 years. And if the last 2 years has taught us anything, it's taught us that. So understanding what the value is 10 years from now, 20 years from now, is that difficult? How do you go about that? Can you even try?
Well, it's got to be about the vision of the place and the people in that place, because it's their vision. And that's the thing that most people forget. So Martin was talking about, you know, the procurement, which is the very black and white, and it's great that you've got 20%, 40%, whatever it is. We all do that, or proactive councils do that. But it's actually, it has to start with the person in the street. It has to be, so why would we make Birmingham, and I use Birmingham, it's a lovely place. Why would we want to have what's going to happen there in the way that Martin expresses? Because the people there say, actually, we can do better than what we've got. We want something to improve. Well, that's your starting point. Because if we really want to develop communities, and whether it's the business community or residential communities, we have to start with where that community finds itself and where its aspiration is, and where it wants to go. Now, it's quite interesting. You say about 10 years is a long way away. Well, I have to be honest with you. I'm building for the next 100 years. And I'm doing that because I've got a great example of a 100-year worth of estate, the Becontree estate, the first council housing of its kind. All the infrastructure was put in there, you know, all the playing fields. And we've got more public green space than any other council in London. And that's a fact because of the way they built it. Now, they future-proofed it when the horse and carts was the main driver of delivering the goods. They built 27,000 homes. They built the schools, the GP surgeries. They built those community centres. And that's why not only have we brought you equality, we stopped racism by banning slavery, we also won the World Cup for the country. So the Becontree is a brilliant example of, if you get it right and connect the community story with the bricks and mortar and the hearts and minds, you actually build sustainability, true sustainability that will be there for generations to come. And that's what I believe in. I'm lucky enough to live on the Becontree, be a product of the Becontree, and learn from what it's given me. In the pandemic, our public green spaces were massively important. You're only ever 10 minutes walk away from a public green space. Most of us are 5 minutes walk away. So, you know, that's what we've got to learn about. That's how these procurements, so that I'm pleased government has put it together, but they haven't really articulated it to local government in the way that I feel they should have done. And at the same time, you know, the elastic band, there's only so far you can stretch local government before it breaks. And we've seen some recent examples of that.
Great stuff, Darren. Thanks a lot. Okay, panel, give me a wave if you want to comment on any of these little threads that are coming out of the conversation so far. But in the meantime, I'm going to go to Martin to, well, first put a bit of pressure on you to point out that you may well be responsible for planning the development of Tyrone Mings' descendants and the next generation of Aston Villa players to win us the World Cup in years to come. But perhaps leaving that to one side, the procurement process is going to have to change to take account of the construction playbook. What sort of evolution do you see coming through? What are you going to have to change in your processes?
I think it's getting much more setting out at the beginning, what are the aims and objectives of the procurement? What are the deliverables we need from it? I think in doing that, we need early contractor involvement. And I think we probably I can see us moving much more towards two-stage tendering. The first stage about defining, potentially being, you know, a PCSA contract with either target cost or, you know, actually on Birmingham International, we're looking at an NEC option E, i.e. hours times rates, because what we want for the first phase, develop the scheme design into something that is buildable. And the reason for that is that we won't want to stifle innovation or any, we want to get all the ideas on the table. We may go up some blind alleys or and just come to a conclusion that that solution won't work, but we want to encourage that contractors to work with us and our stakeholders to look at all options. So I think there's that, you know, that's a change in philosophy really, and I think it's about contractors and ourselves taking that leap of faith and getting involved at the beginning and investing the time and money. And from past experience, I think investing the money up front and doing the surveys and fully understanding what and developing the solution as far as possible makes the actual delivery far more efficient. and it doesn't result in a load of change and delays and disruption. Getting it to the point where you know exactly what you're going to build is key. So I think it's very much upfront in early contractor involvement in working in collaboration is what I'm looking to move towards. And also I think, ultimately, are we in the position where we could move to more alliancing? I think that is really, we're probably not mature enough for that at the moment, but I think that's got to be the way forward in the long term.
Can you describe what you mean by alliancing?
Well, if I take an example, the Network Rail job at Norton Bridge at Stafford was seen as the primary example of alliancing. It was very successful, but I think that was very much around the individuals that were involved in that project, and it's where all parties, put their costs, work together under one contract. It's all for one for all. There's a one risk pot. It's not shared. Everybody's involved in that one and managing that one risk and delivering it and getting paid their costs. I think that is, I'm not sure, I've got past experience of where alliancing have started out, but at the end, contractors and the clients resort to type, and the contract comes out and says, oh, those are disallowed costs, or the contractor's looking for compensation events. And, it's very much something that I think we're probably scared of at the moment. But I think in time, it's something that I think we should look to do more of if we are going to truly deliver value for money.
Martin, you have to forgive me. I'm a bit of a layman in these things. So can you explain a little bit about? I mean, why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you form alliances rather than contractual arrangements?
I think at the moment people are. It's a bit of a leap of faith because you are all in it together. You don't have a fixed price.
So is this
target price? It is what it is.
Is this more about? Sorry, forgive me. Is this more about mindsets than
Yes,
anything else?
Very much so. People's mindsets are saying, there's a budget. We have to deliver it for that. If we don't deliver it for that, we're all responsible. You can't just blame one or other party.
Okay, Tara and Andrew, I'm going to come to you on these points because there's clearly a kind of client side and supply side to this part of the discussion. But first, Darren, I mean, that idea of alliance, you've been in partnerships with developers and contractors at Barking Dagenham for years, haven't you? What's the difference between those arrangements and a formal alliance in which everybody's sharing the risk equally?
Well, so we've done something slightly different. We built a methodology that allowed the public and private sector to work together through our organisation called Be First. So it's an investment development planning company wholly owned by the council. So what we've got is the values of the public sector with the entrepreneurialness of the private sector, but never forgetting the aspiration of the voluntary sector, the community, right? And that's what we've been able to do. So when I look at what we've been able to do, you kind enough mentioned 4,000 homes, because I said that earlier, and the film studios. Well, actually, yeah, all right, and the largest data centre in Europe, and a world-class science and engineering facility, £2 billion worth of investment. No thanks to government, by the way, national government. This has been built by local government working with the private sector on those schemes. We are going to build 50,000 homes. We're going to build the size of York over the next 20 years. But we're also going to build all that infrastructure that needs to happen with it. So when we have a framework of partners who we know we can trust, that we know that they buy into the vision that's been proposed by the community in the first place. So actually, we find that rather than having lots of people opposing the change that's coming forward, they're actually embracing it. We've got the Free Markets of London coming. We're talking to other anchor institutions at the moment about coming to the borough because actually they're buying into the vision that the community is putting forward. And that's the difference. So am I pleased this has come? Of course I am. Anything that makes it more contractually required, because actually in all sectors and in the public sector. Some councils are not as proactive as others. I'll accept that. But in the private sector, some companies are not as well-meaning as others. Some want to build and make a quick buck, and they don't care what they build. Others actually have a value to what they build, and they want to be respected over a long period of time. That's what this does. This allows us some ability. Our problem is, as I said before, though, okay, we don't know exactly what's in the white paper, but we've got good ideas. I've been listening and talking to ministers, and in my other hats, and it's very clear to me that once you start saying, oh, this zone will be your growth zone, and by the way, that gives you default right to build, actually, you're then leaving it to people's personal values on what level of quality of build you'll get in these particular areas. And you're changing communities without their acknowledgement of that change, which is a real dangerous place to be. So, I'm worried, not so much for Barking and Dagenham. We know what we're doing here. We're already an intensified space. But when you look at other places where you've got towns, and then all of a sudden you could build another 6,000 homes, and those people living in those towns have no say on what's being built there, that's going to be really problematic. So I am pleased for this, but I am concerned on other bits that I'm seeing coming from government, which stretches that elastic band, as I said earlier.
Great stuff, Darren. Thank you. Okay, Tara. So two points that I'd really like you to address in this, and then by all means take this wherever you want, and that there are loads of threads coming out of the conversation. But the two things I'm really interested in that have come out so far are around these concerns that the public sector has, that local authorities have about the planning white paper and this zoning of growth zones. Can the construction playbook play a role in soothing some of those fears? Because some of the objectives of the public sector are kind of built into contracts. So while we may lose some power as a planning authority, we may gain some power as a contractor, as the contracting party. And then the second thing is that it seems to me that there's a public sector willingness in what Martin and Darren have been saying they're already looking at value in different ways. They're already very willing to look at longer term partnerships, and it suits their interests. So is the construction playbook perhaps something more that's for the private sector, to get the private sector lined up with these sorts of values?
So some really interesting things coming out. I think the construction playbook absolutely, as long as it is rolled out properly, has the ability to give that framework of guidance and work with the other documentation and guidance that's out there. But I think Darren makes a good point. There does appear to be a disconnect, and these different parts of government aren't talking to each other. So certainly one of the things I'm hearing today is how can I personally support that, and how can Perfect Circle and SCAPE support those conversations that need to be had. Taking your second point around, the longer term partners and the public sector, and I suppose touching on what Martin said about alliancing. For me, I think it's all about the management of risk and the risk profile. And I think different people or different organizations maybe have different appetites for risk. And how do we bring those together so that perhaps alliancing and those longer term partnerships can be in play?
And does the construction playbook give you practical ways in which you can do that?
I think it does, but I think it depends on the people at the table. I think there's a lot of really good things out there, and the playbook does bring a lot of that together. But there has to be the willingness from the partners to use it, to apply it. But that's, as Darren rightly says, that's out there already. It's people need to pick it up and use it, in my opinion.
And I think you wanted to make some points also around how procurement is going to have to change and evolve to take account of what the construction playbook is setting out.
Yeah, so again, echoing, the early investment and the ECI. And for me, I think it's our industry works that you have people come in, bid, sell the dream, as Martin rightly says. But I think where the investment needs to be is that delivery team that's actually on the ground, working with the communities, need to be talking with each other, making sure that there's no gap between what the promise was and what's going to be on the ground for 5 years and going to be there in 100 years' time. And sometimes we're running, we don't stop and do that exercise, which I think is really, really valuable.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you. Andrew, we've got these two threads running in the background around the changes to planning, which you've already addressed to an extent, but perhaps the construction playbook playing a role in soothing some of the fears about that, and also whether this is something that's really about bringing the private sector into line with public sector values. That the public sector is already there, and the construction playbook is really more about suppliers.
Yeah.
And then obviously your own comments on how you feel procurement processes are going to have to adapt and evolve.
Well, I suppose the last 2 points you made, so public sector getting the private sector up to speed, and then adaptation of procurement, just to unpick that a little bit, because that treats the public sector as one unified body, and it's not. Even at the level of, Darren's smiling, even at the level of a single council, there are significant tensions between the aspirational people who would be completely bought in with the construction playbook and want to look at the long term and community focus and social value focus. But there's always going to be a tension between them and the colleagues who actually sign off the procurement route, who report to the Section 151 officer, who are naturally prudent and precautionary people. And the playbook actually allows that tug of war, if you like, to take place, because there's a delivery model approaches all the way from transactional, which is, I know my requirement, I'm going to deliver this, it's a school with 3,000 bricks in it, all the way to trusted helper, which is then moving into the alliancing model, which people have talked about. And I was very interested to hear, Martin, you talking about going to two-stage, which I think is actually a fundamental for how these things are going to be delivered, NEC option E, and then moving beyond that potentially into developing alliancing. I think that's going to be a very strong component in how this can be delivered, because simply going back to Tara Lee and saying, here's the architectural dream, we're going to sell the dream, and then we're going to value engineer it 35% down in cost, and it will look like the last thing we built. So we need to move away from that and into things which allow whole life costing, which also looks at the tension in local authorities between capital and revenue. That tension has to be there, incidentally, for good governance, but it doesn't need to be as complete as it is. You need to be able to talk about capital and revenue in the same room sometimes, so that you can understand the whole life cost of a building, not merely the construction cost. And moving on to things like should cost modeling, which feeds into the development of longer programs of work rather than just letting one contract at a time. Because if you just let one contract at a time, you'll never really gain the organizational learning, which enables you to base should cost modeling on experience moving through a program and on rolled out learning, which then delivers the social value, which delivers the community engagement, which gets the SMEs embarking in Davenham, working with the B-First contractors and working with the voluntary groups and everybody else. That's the kind of thing we need to do. So we need to unpick a couple of tensions between the capital and revenue and between the prudent governance of the 151 officer and the aspirations of leaders and people who want to deliver these great long-term programs.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed, Andrew. It's very, very concise and clear guidance and advice from you. I'm going to launch the next of the polls to just see how our audience is feeling, having heard a little bit more about what the construction playbook is aiming to do and how processes are likely to change as a result. And when I do that, I'm going to come back to Martin to comment on anything that you've heard so far in response to your earlier observations, and also move the conversation on a little bit towards compliance. So and where you see policing going, how is this going to be policed and enforced? And probably just to reiterate something that I said right at the top, this is coming into force for government departments. So anyone in central government and arm's length bodies that are procuring from January next year. So it's not actually aimed directly at local authorities or organisations such as the Urban Growth Company.
Yeah, I mean, we embrace it fully. I think the issue for me is the construction playbook sits there. It's a document. It's actually ensuring that people actually embrace it, and it will require a change in mindset. And I think that is the challenge we face. People are very, have always done it this way, and this is a change. And I think that is going to be really difficult for people to get. Collaboration is not easy. Bedroom plate, you can say, yeah, we're very collaborative. Actually, in practice, we run collaboration work. We're looking to run collaboration workshops to really test whether the individuals that are being put up by the bidders are really truly embracing collaboration, and that is going to be really a challenge for us all, I think, because traditionally contracting has been, a contract, and I was brought up in the 80s where it was very much an ICE fifth contract with claims and additional work and all of that, and that's the background. We've moved on far from that now, and I think that the moving to the next stage and changing people's mindset is going to be the real challenge we face here.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? It does seem to be that you can put all the guidance in place that you like, but it's really about the people around the table. How does a collaboration workshop work?
You put it, well, the way we're going to do it, we've got a facilitator who comes in, trains us in what you look for from collaboration and how you can test it. It's very much you put an issue on the table, and the parties around the table work together how they're going to resolve it together. And it's looking at people's behaviors in that environment, really, and to saying whether they're listening to other people's views and opinions and taking those on board, and then coming up with solutions that suit all parties. And the other thing that I've done in the past is where we've had an adversarial contract, if I can call it that, where we've ended up in adjudication, but it's a long-term 30-year contract. We decided at the end of that adjudication we couldn't go on like that, so we had a facilitated collaboration workshop where the facilitator had the contractor on one side and went through with him what are all the issues you've got with your contracting authority. Did the same to us. And it was interesting then, put them both on the table and work through the issues and saying, well, how can we change? What do we need to change? And it's very interesting hearing it from the other side as to what their issues were with us and vice versa.
Was there much overlap as a rule?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It all came down to, as well, the only way we made that work was people changing their minds and attitudes. And actually you have to be brutal on both sides and saying, if that individual cannot change or is not prepared to show the right behaviours, you have to move them to another project.
Thanks, Martin. Darren, it might be a little unfair because I don't suppose you're taking part in procurement work meetings directly, but does this sound like kind of old hat for Barking and Dagenham as well, that you've been doing this sort of stuff for ages and collaboration workshops and so on?
We have, because it's not a whole hat. It's about, and if Martin said this, it's about getting people. You can make technical change. This document is a technical change document. But if you can't make the emotional change, then actually it doesn't matter what you've written on a piece of paper, people are not going to follow it through. So we had to change the whole way the council operated. Why did we bring in? So we had a choice of cutting salami slicing, as every other council did, our planning department, our internal regeneration department, so on and so forth. Or we could invest in it using the private sector. That's what we did, right? So what we've already got is we've got an operation through Be First that brings that collaboration together already, because it is the public and the private sector. It's the values and the ambitions of both sectors coming together in this one company. What I find really interesting is the companies know how to do good business will come in and talk turkey with us at the very beginning, all right? And we will give them the steer of what will go through. Look, planning is planning, right? I don't do planning. It's not my forte. I have other counsellors for that. But I know the framework of which they work within. I know that what will push their buttons and what won't push their buttons. So it's about saying to people, well, look, if you do this, this is the vision of this community. If you do that, they'll buy into it. If you don't do that, expect them to say, sorry, we don't like that, because they have their own value. So I wouldn't say it's old hat. I'd just say that we saw what had gone badly wrong in other areas. And look, I love the Olympic Park. I think it's brilliant. I say that because the greatest football team in the world's there. But at the same time, I think it's the biggest alien ship that's ever landed in East London, because only the hags are allowed to get on board. I go and support that football team. I'm not allowed into Westfields because I'm supporting my football team. Well, what a disgrace, that I'm not good enough when I'm supporting my football team to go and use their facilities. So I don't ever go in Westfields anymore. That's the problem when you get it completely wrong. That was meant to be a legacy. Remember, we're talking about an area that wasn't redeveloped after the war. So the Messerschmitt and the Spitfire bullet holes were still in the walls. People got, businesses got totally moved out. Things got, £12 billion of public money was spent in redesigning a better future. The only problem is, if you live on the outskirts of that, you're not connected to the place.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's the problem. So I'm pleased about this, but we've got to start thinking about actually how is the community at the heart of that change. If we really want to build the communities of tomorrow, we've got to listen to the communities of today.
So what we're talking about here, Tara, is really cultural change, isn't it? And the playbook is kind of providing foundations for that cultural change. But the industry itself, on both sides, public and private sector, is going to have to do a lot of work to rethink its attitudes and approaches to development and procurement to avoid failures like the one that Darren's been pointing out. What's the work of Perfect Circle in that process? What can you do to help that cultural change?
So I think it comes back to education, and something I'm hearing about is, well, what if you don't comply? And this is a big step change. And I'm wondering, and I don't have the solution, but do we look at this a bit different? It's what is the reward? And when I say the word reward, I don't mean a financial reward, but in the same way that the guidance has changed, does the reward need to shift or change so that it's part of the journey, recognizing that it is, this idea of alliancing or working together is a bit different. I think back, 15, 20 years ago when, and it still happens, but less so, but you had projects that were delivered through incentivization. So, from the very beginning to the very end, where you had that entire team, the designer, the contractor, the supervisor, and you were all incentivized against a fee. And when the project succeeded, everybody succeeded. It wasn't cut up. And I think that goes into sort of some of the things that Andrew and certainly Martin were talking about, taking everyone on the journey, having everyone at the table, no finger pointing, etc.
So this is something that's happening in examples of good procurement already, but the Construction Playbook is going to enable it to be embedded everywhere.
Yeah.
Thanks. Andrew, audience, we're going to come on to some of your Q&As any second now, but first I want to give Andrew a chance to address some of these issues that have come out. And also, Andrew, I guess, could you make clear for us what the penalties are for local authorities, for non-government departments that are procuring? Because the Construction Playbook is very specifically aimed at government departments, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the intention of the Construction Playbook is that sooner or later people need to demonstrate that they're operating to these principles if they wish to continue accessing public money. I mean, that's fairly straightforward. I think the demonstration of that is not black and white, because you've got quite a wide range of things which would be acceptable. So in the construction playbook, you really can just go to market with a completely detailed design and then tell everybody that was clearly the best thing to do. Or you can adopt a much more collaborative approach. So this is something, we're going to see how this plays out. It's not a finished, this isn't finished at all. Again, this is the end of the preface. Now we move into the story of how the construction playbook lands and interacts with everything else. I was interested in a couple of things that people have said in terms of collaboration workshops. That's something that SCAPE certainly fosters very strongly. But the key thing there is you have to have people in the room empowered to change. You can't have somebody in the room who is not empowered to make a decision. They've got to be empowered to change without putting themselves at risk. So you've got to de-risk the personal and the career and make sure that people are allowed to make that change. I like the idea of talking about the public sector owning, talking about the public and private collaboration, because effectively people may not know, but SCAPE is a public sector owned company. We're owned by 6 local authorities. Within that, we're a private company, and we procure frameworks through which private companies deliver outcomes for the public sector. So we close the complete circle, and hopefully are perceived to deliver value, however people are defining that. I like the idea, again, Tara, you were talking about effectively show people what good looks like. You know, historically good looked like a cheap school. Now good looks like a good 50-year story. And I guess, you know, to an extent we must be getting it right, because we've got about £5.5 billion of construction going through live now. So I guess that must be working well. But this is the beginning of the story, and it's a good step forward. We really welcome it, but it remains to be seen how it will land and what cultural change will be needed within delivery bodies, especially in local authorities, if they're to make the best of this.
Great stuff. Thanks very much indeed, Andrew. Okay, we've got some questions in from the audience. Anthony Brophy's asking about digitisation, and our experts on digitisation are going to be in the next session, Anthony. So if you tune in to the next session, we'll cover that off there. But Les Needham is asking, as a main contractor, about open tenders in local authority procurement, led by local authority procurement teams, going against the principles of the playbook, moving away from value and encouraging a race to the bottom on price. How can this be addressed? So I'm going to come to Darren and Martin with that in a second. But Andrew and Tara, is this an appropriate point that Les is making?
Do you want me to? Do you want me to
go for it.
Dive into this pond? Hello, Les. Well, there are going to be times when an open tender is the right thing to do. Okay, sometimes it's okay to tender a project in your open market. You know, one would clearly hope that somebody like a local authority would bear in mind who their stakeholders are and attempt to favour tenders received from people who will develop local social value and local SMEs. Sometimes that's okay. Sometimes the right way to do this is to go to one person and discuss an NEC option E, as Martin is talking about, right the other end, where you have a completely open way of delivering something. And sometimes, and we think often, the right answer is for people to use frameworks, whether it's ourselves or, you know, Barking and Dagenham have their own frameworks, as have many local authorities. I think the answer, and I've been banging on about it for 25 years, really, is there is a mixed economy of procurement. That is probably a healthy thing. So sometimes open tenders are good, and sometimes frameworks which enable you to deliver long-term programs and regenerate social value and learning are better.
What does the playbook say about open tenders?
Well, in terms of the delivery models, they're allowable. You know, in terms of the delivery models, number one, the transactional delivery model says, I know my requirement, who can best deliver it? And it says, I've got it here, traditional approach in which the industry is engaged to provide a standard service with competition at procurement. So that's in the construction playbook. It's one end of a spectrum, and the other end, the trusted helper, I guess, is much more it says here, I need help, come and perform for me without me having to tell you how that needs to be done. So that's on the other side of an option E. That's just I need some education for 50 years. How are you going to deliver it? So it allows for all of those things.
Okay, let's go to Martin with open tenders, then a view on open tenders, but also a second point. David Hutt is viewing, and he wants to know if in order to build better, greener and faster, we need to mandate whole life costing rather than focusing on lowest capital costs. So the concerns are all in a very similar area for our viewers.
Okay, I think in terms of open tender, I think one size doesn't fit all here. You have to develop your procurement strategy for the situation you face. And, you know, as Andrew has said, there are various different options, and the playbook allows for all of those. I don't think one size fits all. As Andrew says, there may be instances where an open tender is appropriate, other options where a framework is to be used. So I think it is very much horses for courses. What are the challenges, what needs to be done, and what's the most appropriate route to be taken. In terms of whole life costs, yeah, that's something I've been banging on about for probably 10 years. In a previous life, I was responsible for maintenance on the underground, and I was given these projects that were handed over that were a nightmare to maintain. And the one I always cite is the roof of Canary Wharf Station. Maintaining and cleaning that is a challenge, shall we say. And it may have been an architect's dream to build that, but to maintain it is so yes, I'm fully on board with whole life costs should be considered right at the beginning and get the optimum solution. I'm not saying you build something that is not iconic and not but it's got to be maintainable at a reasonable cost.
Yeah, for anyone, any viewer not familiar with Canary Wharf Station, the roof is a long way away from any mop, right?
Yeah,
it's very high up indeed.
Tara,
so we're over to you with open tenders and whole life costing and how the construction playbook addresses those, but also another question from an anonymous attendee, but I don't think too mischievous. Highways England dropped their collaboration workshops because they found people were gaming them. So it's possible to get, you kind of know what the right answers are, even if you don't mean them. So that kind of idea that we were discussing earlier of increasing collaboration, getting everyone to work together, it is possible to game it. It is possible to go in with ulterior motives. So does the construction playbook help us perhaps overcome some of those problems?
So just taking the whole life costing, I mean, my experience is that, before we're even at a construction site, so much of that is built into the optioneering, the pre-feasibility, the ECI, taking that into consideration about what does that cost look like over a 100-year period? Is it achievable? Is it dismissed because of health and safety? So I'd like to think that that's the norm before you get an iconic roof that is a challenge for 50 years, but potentially not always the case. The second point I would say about the workshops is really valid. And I think with anything in our industry, those kind of sessions are only going to be as powerful and as useful as the relationships and the trust. I think people need to feel like they can come in and be honest and not feel, as Andrew said, at risk, have the power to make the decision, not just take the notes. And so I think there's a responsibility on public and private sectors to be sending the right people to those meetings, so they aren't just a lip service, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, great points. Thank you very much, Tara. Okay, it's time for sort of closing remarks and summing up now. So what I'd like you all to do now, we'll round robin around the panel. I'm going to ask you each for one top tip in complying with the construction playbook and this new idea of value that we need to pay attention to, and the whole life cost of projects, and avoiding the sorts of mistakes that Darren illustrated, where you get a shopping centre next to a football stadium and the supporters in the football stadium aren't allowed to use the shopping centre. So I'm going to go round. I'm giving you all a chance by talking a lot so that you all get a chance to think of one tip for complying with the construction playbook. And by all means, pick up on any of the points and threads that you've heard so far that you'd like to just make an observation about. Let's start with Darren, Councillor Orwell.
I hate when you start with me because I like to hear what everyone else has to say. Look, all of this boils down to one simple thing called trust. We need the community to trust the local authorities to deliver their vision. We need the private sector to trust the local authorities to know what that vision is. And the local authority needs to trust the private sector in delivering and investing in the vision of that community. It's not rocket science, it never was. We can look in the past and see where we've done it well. What we need to do is make sure, though, that there is always accountability. And it just worries me that, again, even in this document, there's no real accountability. And I think of some of the latest tragedies that we've seen in housing and buildings generally. And it's normally when the sectors have been left to their own devices and there's no one who has a vested interest, that doesn't have a vested interest, actually managing what's going on. And that worries me. We need the ability for someone to be able to say, these are the standards, these are the values that we want to see in future build across sectors. And that, if we do that, actually we'll have good build, quality build that will build communities and help for the infrastructure that this country desperately needs to improve our lot in life for the majority of people.
Thanks, Darren. Martin.
I think it's, for me, about early contractor involvement, working together to deliver optimum solutions and being prepared to put ideas and issues on the table that are, might be a risk or might be, might not go anywhere, but blue sky thinking to actually look at new ways of doing things. How could we make this better? Not to think, oh, we just do what the client tells us. The client doesn't know all the answers. We want the involvement from the contractors and the private sector and the supply chains to come up with the optimum solutions. So it's working with us to come up with that in partnership, collaboration, alliancing, whatever we want to call it. But we have a one aim and objective, which is delivering projects and with the optimum solution.
Great stuff.
Up front at the beginning.
Thanks, Martin. Tara, your top tip for complying with the construction playbook.
I don't know if it's bespoke to the playbook, but I find with every project, I think it's really simple. Imagine it's your own money and it's your own community. And I find that if you keep that in your mind, you're not going to make too many bad decisions or steer too far off the course. Maybe not the professional answer, but certainly an emotional one that I try to apply.
That certainly aligns with the sort of idea of the social impact of the development that you're procuring and understanding how that resonates throughout the community. So yeah, good tip. Thank you. Andrew.
I think it's a really simple one, and I believe various people have said it in different ways, which is projects impact the public sector, the private sector, the third sector, the whole community. Get everybody in the room, listen to them and trust them. And that will be the simple one.
I think trust is probably a very appropriate word to end that conversation on. Viewers, thank you very much for your attention over the last hour. I hope you found it enlightening and stimulating enough for you to go ahead and implement the Construction Playbook guidance straight away. If you'd like more advice, please don't hesitate to contact our friends at SCAPE. If you missed the poll that we just ran asking if you'd like some advice from SCAPE on this subject, then by all means just put your email address or your contact details into the chat and we'll follow up after the event. But before you do that, please take a moment virtually to thank our fantastic panel for sparing their time to share their insights and experience and guidance with us today. It's been a real pleasure to spend an hour with you all. Thank you, Councillor Darren Rodwell of Barking and Dagenham Council and the LGA and London Councils. Thank you, Martin Faulkner from the Urban Growth Company. And thank you, Tara Lee McVeigh from Perfect Circle. And thank you, Andrew Bannister from SCAPE, for your contribution to the conversation and also for SCAPE's support in making this webinar series happen. We're going to be back with SCAPE and another expert panel on the 17th of June to look at some more policy areas in the Construction Playbook and how they can deliver better outcomes. Meanwhile, I'm going to be back on Tuesday on our sister channel, The Voice of Authority, with a panel from the Key Cities Network to discuss how they're deploying future High Streets funding from the High Streets Task and the High Streets Task Force. You can register for both of those sessions and find a link to the video from today's session at 3fox.co.uk. So until Tuesday from our panel from SCAPE, and Perfect Circle, and from me and from everyone at 3Fox. Thank you and good afternoon.